I remember the message not because of what it said, but how it made me feel. A simple string of words: "Don't come to my wedding. Just watch the live stream. LOL," delivered like a slap wrapped in glitter. She could have just said she didn't want me there. But no, she added that little LOL at the end, like cruelty was a joke, like exclusion was something to be laughed at. I stared at it for a while, my thumb hovering above the screen, not quite sure what I was supposed to feel. Hurt? Anger? Disbelief? I felt all of them, but mostly tired. A bone-deep kind of fatigue that only comes when disappointment has worn itself into your marrow. So I typed back, "Okay." No pleading. No why. No justification. Just okay. Then I opened my laptop, logged into the trust account, and began the cancellation process. It was money she never knew I'd been sending. Quiet deposits, month after month. $100,000 over 3 years, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because I believed in her dreams even when she couldn't fund them herself. She had no idea I was the reason her credit stayed clean, her business got off the ground, her car didn't get repossessed. She had never asked. She had just received. That was the rhythm of our relationship. She took, and I gave, and neither of us said much about it. But that text drew a line in the sand. Not just a boundary, but a border, and she made it clear I was not welcome. Not even in the photos of her big day. So I did what I never thought I could. I stopped. I didn't rage or retaliate. I simply stopped being the silent scaffold she leaned on. And then I silenced my phone. The next morning, the calls started. First one, then another, then 5, 10, 23 by noon. Voicemails stacked like desperate breadcrumbs. "Please call me back. I didn't mean it like that. You know I was just joking. We need to talk. Please." But I was busy. Not just figuratively, I was literally busy. That morning, while she scrambled to make sense of my silence, I was walking the quiet hallways of a children's hospital, comforting a mother whose son had relapsed. I held her trembling hand and offered comfort where I once offered cash. In that moment, I realized how much more my presence could mean when offered to those who truly needed it. Because love, I'd learned, is not just what you give, it's who notices and who does not. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been the one who helped her draft the guest list, long before there was talk of a venue or color scheme. We'd sat together on my balcony, sipping iced tea and dreaming aloud. She'd rattled off names, some familiar, some I hadn't heard since high school, and I'd helped her whittle the list down, offering gentle reminders like, "Do you really want to invite Jenna? She hasn't spoken to you since that fallout in 2018. Back then, she said, "No, you're right. I only want people who've been there for me." Funny how that list changed once the photographers and planners entered the picture. Once social optics became more important than emotional history. Once I was no longer the sister with sound advice, but the inconvenient reminder of things too real, too unpolished for a curated wedding album. When the official invitations went out, cream cardstock, gold foil lettering, mine never arrived. No envelope in my mailbox. No delicate script bearing my name. Nothing. I only knew the wedding date because our cousin Liz sent me a photo of her own invite, captioned, "Can't wait. It's going to be gorgeous." I waited a few days, thinking maybe mine had been lost. I even checked with the post office. But deep down, I already knew. So when the text finally came, "Don't come to my wedding. Just watch the live stream," LOL, it wasn't just an afterthought. It was intentional. Designed to humiliate me with subtlety. An exile disguised as efficiency. I deleted the photo of her invite from my phone. I unsubscribed from the bridal mailing lists I'd signed her up for. I removed the Pinterest board I'd secretly built, filled with centerpiece ideas and lighting concepts she'd loved but couldn't afford. I had planned to surprise her by covering them anonymously. Everything she now had was thanks to others, she'd claimed in a recent post. "So grateful for the real ones who showed up for me," she wrote under a photo of her bachelorette brunch, every face smiling but hers. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I looked around my apartment, smaller than hers, quieter than hers, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. There's a strange, sacred power in realizing that your presence isn't owed. That no matter how much you give, there are some people who will never see your worth until they feel the weight of your absence. She felt it the moment her florist called to cancel. Unpaid invoices tend to do that. Her makeup artist followed suit. So did the venue coordinator. She called me again. And again. But I was still busy. After the 50th missed call, she stopped trying to reach me directly. The panic spilled over into the family group chat, the same one I had muted months ago when every message seemed to echo with subtle jabs and glaring silences. Does anyone know where she is? She's not answering. This is serious. We need her to respond. My cousin Talia tagged me with a gentle, "Hey, can you call your sister?" She's really upset. I almost replied. Almost. But then I saw my mother's message. She's always been dramatic. Let her cool off. She'll come around. It was like a stone dropped in my chest. That same tone, that same dismissal, I'd heard it all my life. Every time I voiced a concern. Every time I drew a line. Every time I said I was hurt. I wasn't grieving the wedding. I was grieving the myth of family, the fantasy I had clung to for years, hoping if I gave more, they'd see me, appreciate me, maybe even love me in the way they loved her, freely, loudly, publicly. Instead, I became the ghost. Useful only in the dark, silent in the light. Still, a small part of me wondered, did she really not see the line she crossed? Was it oblivion or cruelty that made her send that text? My phone buzzed again. A different name this time. Aunt Rose. She and I had always shared a quiet understanding. The one relative who knew what it was like to be the extra woman in the family, present but rarely praised. Her text was short. I know what they did. I saw the list. You weren't on it from the start. I'm sorry, sweetheart. You deserved better. And with that, the tears finally came. Not because of the wedding. Not because of the money. But because someone had seen me. And that felt like salvation. I sat on the floor of my kitchen, phone in my lap, shoulders trembling in the quiet. The woman in me, the one who had built herself from the ashes of childhood neglect and adult betrayal, whispered something I hadn't allowed myself to believe. You can stop waiting to be chosen. You already are, by yourself. And in that moment, I started planning something for me. Not revenge. Not spite. Just something true. I opened the spreadsheet the next morning. Not out of spite, but clarity. It was all there. Every wire transfer, every quiet favor, every invoice paid from the shadows so she could keep her image intact. $100 here for unexpected travel, $2,400 for a canceled lease she never moved into, $8,300 to erase credit card debt she claimed was ruining her sleep. And that one time, I gave her $15,000 to keep her boutique afloat when a shipment got delayed. She had called me sobbing that day, voice shaking. I hadn't hesitated. I just wired it. Because that's what sisters do, right? They show up. Even when no one else knows. Even when the only thanks is a Venmo emoji or a text that says, "You're the best. I owe you forever." I never asked her to pay me back. That wasn't the point. What I wanted, foolishly maybe, was acknowledgement. The kind you can't cash, but carry like treasure, recognition, gratitude. The occasional, "I couldn't have done this without you." But instead, when her big moment came, she didn't even want me in the room. That night, I took that spreadsheet and printed it. One copy. I slid it into an envelope, along with a photo. Not of us. Of me, the one she'd stopped seeing. The woman who built her own life in quiet, in grit, in grace. The one who never asked for praise, only a place. I sealed the envelope with a piece of gold wax and left it on my hall table. No plans to send it. Just a reminder to myself, I remember. Because forgiveness is a door, not a rug. And sometimes, Keeping the door shut is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. 3 days before the wedding, the messages shifted tone. Gone were the call me and please texts. They were replaced by silence, the kind that pulses louder than any scream. The kind I knew well. That's how my family punished defiance. Not with fury, but erasure. They would paint me as unbothered, unavailable, difficult. The irony burned like old wounds flaring in bad weather, how easily they rewrote the script when I stopped playing the obedient sister. I knew what would happen next. Whispers at the rehearsal dinner about how I'd changed. Excuses muttered to inquiring guests, she's busy, she's traveling, she's going through something. Always said with pitying smiles. Always laced with shame. But not one would say the truth. That I was told not to come. That I honored her boundary, even if it came wrapped in mockery. That I chose peace over performance. Meanwhile, the live stream link arrived, a group email sent to dozens of recipients, my name buried between business acquaintances and distant cousins we hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. Join us virtually for the union of love and forever. No personal message. No apology. Just an invitation to witness what I'd been barred from touching. I stared at the link for a long time, and then I deleted it. I didn't want to watch. Not out of bitterness, but because I deserved to be more than a spectator in lives I helped build. More than a name on a CC line. More than a shadow in someone else's spotlight. So instead of logging in, I made a different plan. I booked a dinner reservation for one. An upscale place with low lighting, white linens, and a wine list long enough to get lost in. I wore the dress I'd been saving, deep plum, with sleeves that felt like armor. I let the waiter pull out my chair. I smiled when he complimented my earrings. I raised a glass to my own name. Not a toast of bitterness, but of becoming. Because maybe the greatest triumph isn't proving you were right. It's living like you were never wrong to want more. The wedding came and went. At least, that's what I gathered from the fragments of few filtered photos on social media, the obligatory love wins caption beneath a picture of my sister kissing her new husband beneath an arch of ivory roses. She looked beautiful. She always did. But there was something in her smile, practiced, slightly off-center, that made me tilt my head. Maybe it was projection. Or maybe it was the ghost of a woman realizing too late who wasn't there. The comments poured in. You looked stunning. Such a magical day. Wishing you both forever love. But not one mentioned the missing maid of honor. The missing sister. The one who had quietly laid the foundation stones for that day, only to be written out of the ceremony script like a typo. I turned off my phone and walked to the park near my apartment. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, just honest. I sat on a bench under a dogwood tree, just beginning to bloom. Pale pink petals gathered at my feet like offerings. For once, I didn't ache. I didn't feel the familiar pull of longing, that desperate wish to be included, to be chosen, to be enough. Instead, I felt still. Still, and strangely sure. I thought about all the things I'd done for her over the years. Not just the money, but the emotional heavy lifting, listening to her cry at 2 a.m. after her first breakup, covering for her when she missed work, helping her write that grant application, coaching her through panic attacks. I had held her pain in my hands like a sacred thing, and when my pain came, she handed it back with a LOL. The sun dipped lower in the sky. The petals kept falling. And somewhere in that soft descent, I let her go. Not with anger. Not with rage. Just release. Because not every goodbye needs to be shouted. Some are whispered into the wind and carried off by dogwood blossoms, unnoticed but final. For 5 days after the wedding, there was silence. No calls. No texts. No new posts from her account. It was as if the glittering crescendo of her perfect day had collapsed into a quiet no one knew how to fill. I imagined the afterglow fading, the photos slowly being posted, the thank you cards waiting to be written. I pictured her scrolling through her messages, rereading our last exchange. 2 words, okay? And the absence that followed. I didn't wonder if she missed me. I wondered if she finally saw me not as a resource, not as a fallback, but as a person with a limit, with a spine, with a quiet fury that could masquerade as grace. The mail arrived that Friday afternoon, a thick white envelope addressed in familiar looping script. No return address. But I knew it was from her. I didn't open it right away. I set it on my nightstand and stared at it like it might explode. By midnight, I gave in. Inside, there was a handwritten letter, 3 pages of slanted apologies and tangled explanations. It started with, "I was stupid." A promising start. She confessed to fear, to insecurity, to listening too much to others who said it would be awkward if the sister who always makes things serious was there. She wrote about pressure, about trying to curate joy like it was a museum exhibit, about being afraid I'd overshadow her even by simply being there. She said she hadn't realized how much I did for her. Not until vendors started canceling. Not until the stress cracked her voice during vows. Not until she opened the venue gift box and found a list of unpaid invoices I had covered, with my name quietly redacted from the records. "Everything I had," she wrote, "was laced with you. And I didn't know until it was too late." She ended with, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I hope you're okay. I miss you." There was no ask. No demands. Just her. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't performing. Still, I didn't reply. Because sometimes, the deepest healing isn't in racing toward reconciliation. It's in resting in the space where your voice, for once, doesn't need to justify its silence. I carried her letter in my purse for a week. Not because I was planning a response, but because some part of me needed to feel its weight, to be reminded that she'd finally spoken, even if belatedly. Words, even honest ones, are strange creatures. They don't fix what's broken, but they do illuminate where the break began. I read it on the train, in the waiting room at the dentist, on a park bench beside a man feeding pigeons who smelled like cinnamon and sorrow. Each time I noticed something different. Not in what she said, but in what she didn't. There was no mention of the years she leaned on me like I was her emergency exit. No acknowledgement of the sacrifices I made in silence. Not a word about the birthday I spent alone because she had a photo shoot. Or the time I missed my job interview to drive her to urgent care, only to be told later that I was too sensitive for expecting a thank you. She remembered the grand gestures, but not the daily ones. The quiet tucking-ins of love that I gave her over and over like folded napkins, practical, invisible, expected. That's what hurt most. Not the live stream. Not the missing invitation. But the erasure of a decade's worth of small, holy offerings. I never needed fireworks. I never needed applause. I just needed her to see me in the light. Not just when things fell apart, but when they were whole. And maybe, that's still too much to ask. So I did what I always do when the world feels too raw. I cooked. I turned on the old jazz playlist we used to dance to as kids. I kneaded dough with my bare hands until the tension melted from my shoulders. I made her favorite pasta, the one with lemon zest and cream, even though I had no plans to share it. Cooking was the one love language I kept for myself. And that night, with my little kitchen glowing and the scent of garlic curling through the air, I whispered to the empty room, "You don't have to understand my silence, but you will feel my absence." Then I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted the woman I was becoming. She didn't need to be chosen anymore. She chose herself. It was a Thursday evening, a week after the letter. The world outside was painted in soft amber as the sun folded itself behind the skyline. I was in the middle of tidying up when my phone buzzed, a number I knew by heart even before the name lit up the screen. My sister. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. Not out of obligation, but because I was ready. "Hey," she said. Her voice was thin, like paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. "Hi," I replied, neutral, steady. There was a long pause. One of those silences that tells its own story. I wasn't sure if you'd pick up." "I wasn't sure either." She exhaled, shaky and slow. I know it's too late, but I had to say it again. I was wrong. I hurt you, and I don't know how to make it right. I didn't rush to respond. I let her words settle in the space between us. You can't make it right, I said gently. Some things don't get tied up with a vow. I know, she whispered. But you can stop pretending like it didn't happen. She sniffled. I thought if I made the wedding perfect, everything else would fall into place. But it didn't. You weren't there. And it was like the light never turned on. That pulled something in me. Because even now, even after everything, I didn't want her to suffer. I just wanted her to see. I didn't want you to hurt, I said. I just wanted you to remember I'm a person. Not a pocket. Not a backdrop. A person. I remember now, she said, voice cracking. God, I remember everything. More silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. Are you okay? She asked finally. I'm healing, I replied. That's not the same as okay. But it's honest. She didn't ask to meet. She didn't ask for forgiveness. And for once, she didn't make it about her. Just that question. Just my answer. That was enough for now. I ended the call with a quiet take care. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because the wound had closed, but because I wasn't holding the knife anymore. In the back of my closet, hidden behind winter coats and shoe boxes filled with photographs I never sorted, sat a wrapped box, white paper, silver ribbon, topped with a note I never signed. Her wedding gift. I had chosen it with care. Months before the invitations, or the lack of one, I had spent hours browsing antique stores for something that felt timeless. Something that whispered permanence in a world that often forgot the value of staying. What I found was a vintage music box. Delicate, hand-painted porcelain with a tiny ballerina in mid-spin. It played a tune from a lullaby we both loved as children. The kind of gift that doesn't scream value, but breathes history. A treasure for someone you think will never forget you. I had it custom engraved on the underside. For the sister who knew my songs before I sang them. And yet, she forgot. She forgot the harmony we built in blanket forts. The whispered secrets under covers. The way we used to hold hands at night after bad dreams. She forgot me. And so the gift remained in the closet. That afternoon, I pulled it out. I sat on the edge of my bed and unwrapped it slowly, the crinkle of the paper sounding louder than it should have. I held the box in my hands for a long time before I turned the key at the base. The tune started, soft and sweet. The ballerina twirled, unbothered by betrayal or grief. I watched her spin as I cried, not because I missed my sister, but because I missed us. The us that danced in matching pajamas. The us that dreamed beneath stars taped to our ceiling. The us that existed before adulthood carved us into roles neither of us wanted, but both of us wore. I placed the box on my bookshelf, where the sunlight caught its porcelain frame just right each morning. Not a symbol of sorrow, but of memory. Of a love that was real once. A love I didn't regret, even if it didn't survive. Some gifts, I realized, are meant to be kept by the giver. Weeks passed. Life resumed in its subtle, steady way, the grind of work, the rustle of city life, the gentle pull of routine. But something inside me had shifted. The silence I once feared had become a friend. It no longer echoed like loneliness. It rang with truth. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived, thick, cream-colored, with gold calligraphy. Not hers this time. A baby shower. Another cousin. Another celebration. Another gathering I wasn't sure I'd attend. Because these days, invitations felt less like warm embraces and more like polite reminders of my place, peripheral, expected but not cherished. The family still buzzed in group chats, still passed around photos and jokes. But I was no longer a participant. Just a name they remembered to include when the guilt outweighed the instinct to forget. I held the invitation in my hands and asked myself a question I never thought to before. Do I actually want to go? Not, will they think less of me if I don't? Not, what will she say? Not, will my absence be interpreted as bitterness? But simply, Do I want to go? And for the first time in years, the answer was no. Not because I was angry, but because I was done showing up to places where I wasn't truly seen. So I placed the invitation in the recycling bin, wiped the glitter from my fingers, and made a different plan. That weekend, I took a solo trip to the coast. I booked a room at a quiet inn overlooking the water. I walked barefoot on wet sand and let the salt air clear the remnants of obligation from my lungs. I read poetry in a cafe with chipped mugs and jazz in the background. I wrote letters I would never send. To my sister. To my mother. To the version of myself who thought love was earned only through sacrifice. And when the tide rolled in at dusk, soft and eternal, I whispered aloud, I deserve joy that isn't conditional. And the sea, like a friend who always listens, whispered back, yes. The ocean has a way of teaching you things your family never could. Like how to release. How to stay still. How to let waves come and go without trying to hold on to any of them. I sat on the rocky edge of the bluff, the tide pulling away from shore in rhythmic breaths, and I thought about all the roles I had been handed: caregiver, problem solver, secret keeper. The quiet one, the dependable one, the one who never made a scene. No one teaches you how to unlearn a role that saved you. But I was learning now. At the inn, the receptionist asked if I was celebrating anything, and without thinking, I replied, yes, myself. She smiled and handed me a bottle of local wine with a wink. On the house, she said, we need more women who toast to themselves. That night, I sat on the small balcony outside my room. The stars blinked overhead like distant reminders that we're never really alone. And I toasted. To freedom. To boundaries. To the silence that had once scared me and now felt like music. To the sister I loved and let go. To the woman I was becoming, not by accident, but by choice. I didn't know what would happen next. If she'd call again. If we'd find our way back to something softer. Or if this was the new reality. Parallel lives, gently diverging. But for the first time, I wasn't waiting. Not for an apology. Not for validation. Not for an invitation. Just being. And in that being, I found peace. It was not loud or triumphant. But it was real. And it was mine. I returned from the coast lighter. Not changed, exactly, but clarified, like the version of me that had always existed beneath the weight had finally stepped forward. That's when the message came. A group chat revival, an invitation to our annual family gathering, the one with matching t-shirts and awkward games, where unspoken resentments simmered beneath potato salad and polite smiles. This year, it was hosted at our uncle's lake house. My name was included in the text. No one addressed the silence of the past few months. No mention of the wedding, the live stream, or the fact that my RSVP had been an ongoing no to anything that didn't feel like love. But the invite was there, blinking on my screen like a dare. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the light stretch across the floorboards like an invitation of its own. And I asked myself, what would it mean to go? Not to be welcomed. Not to be understood. But to show up for myself. Could I walk into that gathering not as the sister, not as the disappointment, not as the reliable one, but simply as a woman with nothing left to prove? Could I go without shrinking? Could I leave if it started to burn? I sipped my tea and let the questions settle. And then I texted back one word, maybe. Because healing doesn't always speak in absolutes. Sometimes it says, I'll think about it. Sometimes it says, I'm learning to choose myself in every room I enter. Even the ones that once made me feel invisible. The family gathering arrived on a warm Saturday morning, all sun and cicadas and the quiet hum of expectations. I drove alone, windows down, a playlist of songs that made me feel like myself filling the air. No thoughts of reconciling or confronting. Just curiosity. A willingness to stand in the same space I once fled, to see what version of myself would rise. When I arrived, they were already handing out the shirts. Every year, a new design, a new slogan. This year's was Anderson Strong, together always. I almost laughed. The woman passing them out, A cousin I barely knew held one out for me, size medium. "Here you go," she said with a smile, like everything was normal. I took it, held it, didn't put it on. Because I wasn't here to blend in. I wasn't here to wear armor disguised as unity. I was here to observe. And as I moved through the crowd, the hugs, the small talk, the performative joy, I noticed things I hadn't before. How Aunt Patricia clutched her wine glass like a shield. How my father spoke only in bullet points. How the laughter always peaked too loud, too forced. And then I saw her. My sister. Across the yard, near the lemonade stand, surrounded by admirers and explanations. She looked thinner than I remembered. Tired in the eyes. Her shirt was the only one that looked crisp, ironed to perfection. Of course, our gazes met. Not with fire. Not with softness. Just a quiet recognition. And maybe a little fear. She didn't come over. Neither did I. Because not every wound demands reopening. Some just need space to scar. Later, I sat on the dock alone, feet in the water, shirt still folded in my lap. The sun was beginning to dip, casting everything in gold. And I whispered to the lake what I couldn't yet say to her. I'm still here, but I'm not the same. As the afternoon unfolded, I floated on the edges of conversation, not shunned, not embraced, just observed. It felt oddly freeing, this in-between. Like walking barefoot across a border I used to fear, now realizing the fence was mostly in my mind. That's when Uncle Harvey found me. A kind man with a belly laugh and the rare ability to speak without agenda. He sat beside me on the dock, offered me a grape soda, and said nothing for a while. Just the sound of water slapping wood and a distant game of cornhole echoing across the lawn. Then, quietly, "She's been quieter lately. Since the wedding." I didn't answer. "She mentioned you paid for her dress," he added. "Didn't tell anyone until after. Cried when she did." I nodded. "She misses you," he said. "She misses what I did for her," I replied. "That's not the same." He sighed, nodding slowly. "No, it's not. But maybe it's a start." We sat in silence a little longer. I didn't need a start. I needed peace. Later, as the sun dipped lower, my mother approached. Her face softer than I remembered. Less makeup, more lines. Her voice quieter too. "Can we talk?" I nodded, more from curiosity than eagerness. She sat across from me, hands folded like a schoolgirl preparing a speech. "I didn't know how far it had gone," she said. "Between you two. Between us and you." "You didn't ask," I said simply. She flinched a little, then nodded. "You're right. I didn't. I assumed you were okay because you always are." "That's not love," I whispered. "I know," she said. "I'm trying to relearn." For a moment, I believed her. Not in the way children believe their parents' promises, desperately, unquestioningly, but in the way grown women believe in spring, after a long winter. Cautiously, with hope but no illusions. She reached over and placed something in my hand, a locket. Old, familiar. "Your grandmother's," she said. "She always said it belonged with the one who kept the family's heart safe." I held it. It was warm somehow. And heavier than it looked. Some things aren't apologies. But they're offerings. And sometimes, that's enough to begin. The gathering ended like all family events do, with leftover desserts, long hugs, and the last-minute scramble to take group photos that will later be cropped, filtered, and captioned as proof of unity. I left before sunset, slipping away quietly while others debated who'd take home the extra potato salad. No dramatics. No final scene. Just a quiet exit. On the drive home, I felt something settle in me. Not closure. Not yet. But clarity. I had shown up. Not to be redeemed or reclaimed. But to witness my own strength in real time. And she saw me. That mattered more than I expected. 3 days later, my sister texted. "Can we talk sometime soon?" Just us. No emojis. No filler. Just 6 words that sounded like someone standing outside in the rain, not asking to come in, just asking to be seen. I sat with it for hours. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew the weight of saying yes. Forgiveness isn't soft. It's surgical. It carves out the infection of bitterness without numbing the pain. It forces you to look at what was lost, not just what can be restored. And I was tired of restoring broken things that would only break again. Still, I replied, yes, but not yet, because I needed more time. Not to punish, but to prepare. I wanted our next conversation to be honest, not reactive. Rooted, not rushed. And for the first time, I knew that waiting wasn't a sign of avoidance. It was a sign of healing. Real healing. The kind that holds both love and limits in the same hand and chooses neither to crush nor cling but to carry. Lightly. Carefully. Like something sacred. I didn't expect her to respond to my "not yet," but she did. Okay, I'll wait. Just 3 words, but they hit me like a cathedral bell, loud in their stillness, honest in their restraint. For once, she wasn't trying to override me. She was listening. That alone felt like a miracle. The days that followed were quiet. No follow-up texts. No guilt-laced voicemails. Just space. And in that space, I rediscovered things I had lost track of. The joy of slow mornings, of reading for no reason, of cooking just for me. I started sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. Not because I had time, but because I had cleared the emotional clutter that always came with her presence. It's strange how absence can be fertile. How letting go of someone, or the version of them you once loved, can make room for a version of yourself you forgot was possible. I met with a therapist. Started journaling again. Lit candles that weren't just for decoration. And every so often, I'd touch the locket my mother gave me, a weight and a whisper, a reminder that even old hurts can shimmer if you turn them in the right light. One night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. Not to send. Just to write. To her. To me. To the memory of us. I wrote about the first time we made a fort out of blankets and whispered our secrets inside. I wrote about the look on her face the day she got her acceptance letter, how I screamed louder than she did. I wrote about the betrayal, the silence, the live stream. But mostly, I wrote about love. Not the easy kind, but the resilient kind, the kind that bruises and bends, but doesn't break entirely. And at the bottom, I wrote, I forgive you. Not because you asked. Not because you deserve it. But because I do. I folded it up. Placed it in a box with other letters I've never sent. Not every truth needs to be delivered. Some just need to be released. 2 weeks later, I texted her. Let's meet. Saturday? Noon? Cafe Amara. The choice of location was intentional, neutral ground, but laced with memory. Cafe Amara was where we used to sit in our early 20s, sharing scones and spiraling about work, love, everything. A place where we'd once felt like partners in life, not opponents. Her reply came quickly. I'll be there. Saturday arrived dressed in soft gray skies. The kind that muted the world just enough to feel like a blank page. I got there early. Ordered chamomile tea. Chose a seat by the window. When she walked in, I saw the hesitation in her steps. She looked older. Not in years, but in weight. The emotional kind. Her eyes found mine. No makeup, no bravado. Just her. She sat down quietly. Didn't reach for a hug. Didn't start with apologies. Instead, she said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. And for a few moments, we just existed in that space. 2 women, once girls, now strangers carrying too many shared ghosts. I've been in therapy, she said finally. Started the week after the wedding. Should have started long before. I sipped my tea. I've been learning a lot about myself. About how I use people. How I expect things without naming them. I said nothing, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted her to feel her words. Not just speak them. She continued. I was scared. Of you mostly. Of your strength. Of how much you could hold. I think I resented you for being the person I wished I was. The honesty startled me. Not because it was new, but because it felt real. I know you probably don't want me in your life anymore, she said. But I'm trying to earn a different place if you'll let me. I looked at her. Really looked. And I said the truth. I don't know what our relationship looks like now. I'm still learning who I am without you taking up all the space. She nodded. Tears welled, but didn't fall. I get that. But I'm open, I added, to something honest. Something slower. She smiled then. Small, wounded, grateful. And in that quiet cafe, I felt something crack open between us. Not a healed wound, but a new path. One not paved by history, but by choice. The weeks that followed were cautious. Not in silence, but in slowness, a kind of deliberate, measured rhythm we had never allowed ourselves before. We texted occasionally. No more than once or twice a week. Each message a single stone placed carefully across the river between us. Sometimes it was a photo, a sunrise, a coffee mug, a book we once shared. Sometimes a memory. Sometimes a question that didn't carry the weight of old grief. We were rebuilding not the old bridge, but a new one. One with railings. One with signs. One where we didn't run toward each other out of desperation, but walked because we chose to. I told her about my therapy. About the ways I was learning to say no without apology. About how boundaries weren't walls, they were doors, and she had to knock now. Not barge. She listened. Asked questions. Wrote things down. There was humility in her now. Not performative shame. Just quiet awareness. One morning, she sent a photo of the old music box, the one I had never given her. I saw one like this in a shop today, she wrote. Made me think of you. I didn't reply right away. Just stared at the image. How strange, I thought, that she'd find one so similar. How strange that she remembered something I never gave her. Later, I sent her a photo of mine. The real one. Sitting on my bookshelf. Her reply came quickly. It's beautiful. I didn't know. You weren't meant to, I replied. Not then. No more was said. It didn't need to be. Because some gestures don't belong to the past or the present, they just are. Symbols of love that existed, even if unseen. Symbols of women trying not to go back, but to go forward. Slowly, deliberately. Together, but separate. Whole, even in the fragments. Months passed. Seasons shifted. And so did we. We didn't fall back into old habits, not entirely. The daily texts never returned. The holidays were cautious. No grand gestures, just thoughtful check-ins. She asked before assuming. I said no when I needed to. We were learning the dance of sisters who had burned the old choreography and were now moving to unfamiliar music. One afternoon in early spring, she invited me to a gallery opening. I think you'd really like it, she said. It reminded me of the stuff you used to draw. That last word, used, caught me off guard. Because I had started drawing again. At first, just scribbles in a journal. Then small sketches I taped to my fridge. Then a portfolio I began, quietly, with no intention except expression. So I went. Not for her. But for me. The gallery was small, intimate, filled with color and silence. I arrived early, wandered alone through the exhibits, letting each piece speak to me. Halfway through, I saw her, across the room, standing next to a canvas painted with layered hues of dusk and bone. She saw me, smiled gently, and didn't rush over. She waited. When I approached, she nodded toward the painting. Something about it feels like you, she said. I looked at it, and strangely, it did. A storm settled after its tantrum. A woman standing alone at the edge of something ancient. I'm glad you're here, she said. I'm glad I came, I replied. Not a reconciliation. Not a ribbon tied around the mess of our history. But a moment. Whole and present. Later, over wine, she said something I'll never forget. You're not who I thought you were. You're more. I smiled, not because it was a compliment, but because she finally saw what had always been there. And maybe that's the quiet redemption we rarely talk about. Not being proven right. But being seen at last, in your full light, there's a moment in healing no one tells you about. Not the shattering, not the first steps, but the strange in-between where everything is better and yet nothing feels familiar. That's where I lived for a while. I was no longer angry, not truly. The sharpness had dulled, sanded down by time and effort, and the quiet work of rebuilding my own self. But sometimes I would touch the memory and wince, as if my heart still remembered the fracture, even though the bone had mended. That's the thing about emotional breaks, they knit back together stronger, yes, but also with a different shape. And I was different now. My sister and I met monthly, not as obligation, but intention. We tried new cafes, visited bookstores, talked about life in fragments, careful not to prod too deep too fast. Once, she brought a box. Inside were things she'd kept, old notes I'd written her, photos of us in childhood, a charm bracelet I thought was long gone. I held onto these, she said, even when I wasn't holding on to you. I picked up one of the photos, us, aged 7 and 12, arms looped around each other, covered in glitter from a failed craft project. You look like you adored me, she said softly. I did, I replied. I still do. But I don't worship anymore. She nodded. That's fair. I'm trying not to need worship. We didn't cry. Not because we weren't moved, but because tears had been spent long ago. What we shared now was something harder and holier. Accountability. It's not flashy. It doesn't photograph well. But it's the true architecture of a repaired relationship. One beam at a time. No shortcuts. She offered to help with my art promotion, contacts, whatever I needed. I thanked her. Told her I'd think about it. Because now I knew, help given from love feels like freedom. Help given from guilt feels like chains. And I would never again let love become my leash. By midsummer, I had my first art show. It was small, a collection of 10 pieces hung in a cozy cafe-turned-gallery downtown. The kind of place where baristas know your order and poems are scribbled in the margins of menus. It wasn't prestigious, but it was mine. I titled the show Reclaimed. Because that's what it was, each canvas a fragment of the self I had tucked away for too long. Watercolors and charcoal, ink and silence. A quiet chorus of all the things I was never allowed to say. The opening night was gentle. No grand speeches. Just murmurs and movement. A handful of friends came. My therapist, Tara, who cried in front of a piece titled Absence. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "You've always been this." And then, near the end of the night, my sister walked in. She wore no makeup. Her hair was in a simple braid. She looked soft, human. She moved through the room slowly, stopping at each piece, reading every title. Standing a little too long in front of the one called Inheritance, a stark silhouette of a girl carrying a house on her back. When she reached me, she didn't speak right away. Just looked at me, and then said, "I had no idea how much of you I missed." I nodded. "It's all here," I said. Everything I never said out loud. She looked around. "You should have been doing this all along." I was, I said. "You just weren't looking." She didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Just reached out and squeezed my hand. "I'm looking now," she said. And for once, I believed her. Not because she said the right thing, but because she said it with nothing behind her eyes but truth. Later, she bought one of the pieces. Threshold. It was the most abstract of them all, just colors merging, retreating, folding into something new. She said she wanted to hang it in her living room. And for the first time, I didn't wonder if she meant it. I just smiled and said, "Thank you." In the months that followed the exhibition, I found a rhythm I hadn't known I was craving. Work, art, rest. Mornings with soft light and warm coffee. Evenings spent stretching watercolors into emotions. A life that wasn't about surviving others' needs, but shaping my own. My sister didn't vanish this time. She sent texts not intrusive, but thoughtful. "Thought of you when I saw this." Or, "Reading this book. You'd love it." She didn't ask to be part of every piece of my life anymore. And I didn't feel the need to hide from her. We'd reached a place that wasn't quite closeness, but wasn't estrangement either. Something tender. Something earned. One Sunday, she invited me to dinner at her place. No occasion. No crowd. Just us. I hesitated before saying yes, not from fear, but from caution. Because it mattered that I was choosing this, not defaulting to it. Her apartment was quiet, warmly lit, with soft music playing and the scent of rosemary and lemon floating through the air. She had cooked. From scratch. I used your old recipe, she said. The one you made after my first breakup. I smiled. You hated it then. I was ungrateful, she said. I didn't see the love in it. We ate slowly. Talked about nothing and everything. At one point, she showed me a framed photo on her bookshelf, the two of us as kids, paint smudged across our cheeks. I keep it there, she said, to remind me where we began. And for the first time, I believed we weren't heading backwards. We weren't slipping into old roles or rebuilding a fantasy. We were forging something entirely new. No debt. No guilt. Just truth. After dinner, she asked if I'd ever consider teaching a class for other women who lost their voices. I thought about it. I might, I said. Because now, when I speak, it's not to be heard. It's because I have something to say. That night, after dinner, I walked home beneath a stretch of stars that seemed to follow me like quiet witnesses. There was no grand revelation, no sudden surge of emotion, just the steady hum of peace settling deeper into my bones. Back home, I opened my journal and wrote something simple. I am no longer surviving. It startled me. Because for so long, survival had been the undercurrent of every day, wrapped in tasks, in caretaking, in shrinking myself to fit the fragile worlds others needed me to hold together. Now I was living. Not extravagantly. Not loudly. But truly. I began drafting a proposal for that class, a workshop, really. For women like me. The ones who lived in the footnotes. The ones who held the weight of entire families without ever appearing in the acknowledgments. I called it the unseen thread, a space for expression, reclamation, art, and honesty. No expectations. Just presence. I told my sister about it. Her eyes lit up. Not with pride, but with something softer. Reverence. You'll help so many, she said. I'm starting with myself, I replied. She didn't try to co-opt the idea. Didn't offer unsolicited advice. Just asked when the first session would be so she could help set up chairs and make sure the kettle was full. Something about that moved me more than any apology ever could. Because this was the balance I'd needed all along. Not to be owed, but honored. Not to be served, but supported. I bought a new notebook. I filled it with quotes, sketches, stories, the kind I once kept hidden, now blooming across the pages like spring after a long, cruel winter. And every time I doubted myself, I'd whisper the mantra I learned not from books, but from choosing to stay standing when the world offered me nothing. Your voice is not too much. Their ears were just too small. The first workshop was held in a sunlit room above a bookstore, hardwood floors, high ceilings, and windows that let the light flood in like grace. There were 12 women. Some in their 20s, some in their 60s. Different stories, same ache, the ache of being unseen, unheard, unchosen in rooms they built with their own hands. I didn't start with introductions. I started with silence. We sat in a circle, breathing in the hush, letting the stillness say what we didn't yet know how to. Then I told my story. Not the whole thing. Not the bruises or the bank statements or the betrayal wrapped in LOL. Just the truth of what it means to love someone who cannot love you back in the way you deserve, and to choose to love yourself anyway. I watched their faces shift. Not in pity. In recognition. And that's when I knew this was what I was meant to do. Not because I had all the answers, but because I was willing to speak the questions. They painted, wrote, shared, cried, laughed, sat in silence. No one was forced. No one was fixed. Just held. At the end, One woman, Marta, gray curls and eyes like weathered stone, hugged me tightly. "You said everything I never had words for," she whispered. "Thank you for naming me." And I realized that's what this was. Naming, witnessing, unburying. I went home that night and stood before my bathroom mirror. Not to adjust anything, just to look. And I said aloud to my reflection, "I see you." Because before anyone else can see us, really see us, we have to see ourselves. And that night, I did. As word of the workshop spread, more women reached out. Some emailed. Some messaged anonymously. Some found me at the cafe and slipped folded notes across the table like secrets finally given permission to breathe. They all said variations of the same thing. I thought I was the only one, and in their reaching, I felt the echo of all the years I had stood alone, at the edges of rooms, at the corners of family photos, at the side of a life that kept forgetting to include me. Now, those same echoes had become bridges. I no longer feared invitations, because now I wrote my own. To myself. To others. To any woman who had ever made herself small so someone else could feel large. And one day, out of the blue, my sister asked if she could attend. Not to teach, she said. Just to listen. I paused. Not from fear, but because I knew how sacred the space was. It wasn't a place for performative apologies. It was a sanctuary for honesty. "Come if you're ready to be vulnerable," I told her. "I am," she said. More than ever. She came. She sat in the back. She didn't speak the first time, just wept quietly as others shared. At the end, she hugged me and whispered, "I never understood what you were carrying." "I'm sorry," I added to it. This time, her apology didn't feel like theater. It felt like truth. And I didn't need her to say more. Because now I knew forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was remembering without needing revenge. It was choosing peace, not performance. And it was knowing that I, too, was allowed to be whole.